Welcome to the Dark Somnium. If you like my narrations or the music that I compose for them, make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll link to the guest narrators' YouTube channels if you'd like to check out their channels after the video. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Noted that I said, I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 weeks straight. I wasn't worried. He was pretty much a notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night, I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. David, man, we need to talk. And that was when he told me about the No End house. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room of the building and you win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside of the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently, Peter tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict. So I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at the paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason, a chill crawls up your spine? I walked towards the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby, decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in place of a worker. It read, Room 1, this way. 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win. I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. The far end was the exit. It was the only door, besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider's webs and headed for the second room. I was greeted by a fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, but a bat hung from the ceiling and flew around in circles. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in the room. I didn't see a stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats that wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob, and my heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open the door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 was when things began to change. On the surface, it looked like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of the wood-paneled floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was the problem. Shadows, plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I barely walked in the door and I was already terrified. It was at that moment I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through, but it was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe, but I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadow remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down as I took my steps, and that's when I saw it. Or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself without thinking into the room beyond. The fourth room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there, surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark, and I never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness couldn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure if there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there, though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whatever was causing the noise was in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I'd never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what this thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed on for a second and I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing. And I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards away from the noise and fumbled for the door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I'm not a drug addict. I have no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis, short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier. And those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't even see the door from where I was. Various brush and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever was in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Birds chirping and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me most. I heard bugs and other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this room was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but this was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was the floor matched the other rooms. The standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin in different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and a few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream. More of a whimper, to be honest, but I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones I couldn't see or touch, but these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was going. The entrance was nowhere in sight, and I still hadn't even seen the exit, so I just crawled, my skin wiggling with the presence of those phantom bugs. After what seemed like hours, I found the door. I grabbed the nearest tree and propped myself up, mindlessly slapping my arms and legs to no avail. I tried to run, but I couldn't. My body was exhausted from crawling and dealing with whatever it was that was on me. I took a few shaky steps to the door, grabbing each tree on the way for support. It was only a few feet away when I heard it. The low hum from before. It was coming from the next room. It was deeper. I could almost feel it inside my body. Like when you stand next to an amp at a concert, the feeling of the bugs on me lessened as the hum grew louder. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, the bugs were completely gone, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the knob. I knew that if I let go, the bugs would return, and there was no way I'd make it back to room 4. I just stood there, my head pressed against the door marked 6, my hand shakily grasping the knob. The hum was so loud I couldn't even hear myself pretend to think. There was nothing I could do but move on. Room 6 was next, and room 6 was hell. I closed the door behind me, my eyes held shut, my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone. I opened my eyes in surprise, and the door I had shut was gone. It was just a wall now. I looked around in shock. The room was identical to room 3, the same chair and lamp, but with the correct amount of shadows this time. The only real difference was that there was no exit door, and the one I came in through was gone. As I said before, I had no previous issues in terms of mental instability, but at this moment, I fell into what I know was insanity. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. At first, I scratched softly. The wall was tough, but I knew the door was there somewhere. I just knew it was. I scratched at where the doorknob was. I clawed at the wall frantically with both hands, my nails being filed down to the skin against the wood. I fell instantly to my knees. The only sound in the room was the incessant scratching against the wall. I knew it was there. The door was there. I knew it was just there. I knew if I could just get past this wall.
Are you alright?
I jumped off the ground and spun in one motion. I leaned against the wall behind me and saw what it was that spoke to me. To this day, I regret ever turning around. There was a little girl. She was wearing a soft, white dress that went down to her ankles. She had long blonde hair to the middle of her back, and white skin, blue eyes. She was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. I know that nothing in my life will ever be as unnerving as what I saw in her. While looking at her, I saw something else. Where she stood, I saw what looked like a man's body, only larger than normal and covered in hair. He was naked from head to toe, but his head was not human, and his toes were hooves. It wasn't the devil. but at that moment it might as well have been. The form had the head of a ram, and the snout of a wolf. It was horrifying, and it was synonymous with the little girl in front of me. They were the same form. I can't really describe it, but I saw them at the same time. They shared the same spot in that room. But it was like looking at two separate dimensions. When I saw the girl, I saw the form. When I saw the form, I saw the girl. I couldn't speak. I could barely even see. My mind was revolting against what it was attempting to process. I had been scared before in my life, and I'd never been more scared than when I was trapped in that fourth room. But that was before room 6. I just stood there, staring at whatever it was that spoke to me. There was no exit. I was trapped here with it. And then it spoke again. David, you should have listened. When it spoke, I heard the words of the little girl, but the other form spoke through my mind in a voice I won't attempt to describe. There was no other sound. The voice just kept repeating that sentence over and over in my mind, and I agreed. I didn't know what to do. I was slipping into madness, yet I couldn't take my eyes off what was in front of me. I dropped to the floor. I thought I'd passed out, but the room wouldn't let me. I just wanted it to end. I was on my side, my eyes wide open, and the form staring down at me. Scurrying across the floor in front of me was one of the battery-powered rats from the second room. The house was toying with me, but for some reason, seeing that rat pulled my mind back from whatever depths it was headed. And I looked around the room. I was getting out of there. I was determined to get out of that house and live and never think about this place again. I knew this room was hell, and I wasn't ready to take up residency. At first, it was just my eyes that moved. I searched the walls for any kind of opening. The room wasn't that big, so it didn't take long to soak up the entire layout. The demon still taunted me. The voice grew louder as the form stayed rooted where it stood. I placed my hand on the floor, lifted myself up to all four, and turned to scan the wall behind me. Then I saw something I couldn't believe. The form was now right at my back, whispering into my mind how I shouldn't have come. I felt its breath on the back of my neck, but I refused to turn around. A large rectangle was scratched into the wood, with a small dent chipped away at the center, right in front of my eyes. I saw the large 7 I had mindlessly scratched into the wall. I knew what it was. Room 7 was just beyond the wall where room 5 was a moment ago. I don't know how I had done it. Maybe it was just my state of mind at the time, but I had created the door. I knew I had. In my madness, I had scratched into the wall what I needed the most. An exit to the next room. Room 7 was close. I knew the demon was right behind me, but for some reason, it couldn't touch me. I closed my eyes and placed both hands on the large 7 in front of me. I pushed as hard as I could. The demon was now screaming in my ear. It told me I was never leaving. It told me that this was the end, but I wasn't going to die. I was going to live there in room 6 with it. I wasn't. I pushed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I knew I was going to push through the wall eventually. I clenched my eyes shut and screamed, and the demon was gone. I was left in silence. I turned around slowly and was greeted by the room as it was when I entered. Just a chair and a lamp. I couldn't believe it, but I didn't have time to dwell. I turned back to the 7 and jumped back slightly when I saw it was a door. It wasn't the one I'd scratched in, but a regular door with a large 7 on it. My whole body was shaking. It took me a while to turn the knob. I just stood there for a while, staring at the door. I couldn't stay in room 6. I couldn't. But if this was only room 6, I couldn't imagine what 7 had in store. I must have stood there for an hour, just staring at the 7. Finally, with a deep breath, I twisted the knob and opened the door to room 7. I stumbled through the door, mentally exhausted and physically weak. The door behind me closed and I realized where I was. I was outside. Not outside like room 5, but actually outside. My eyes stung. I wanted to cry. I fell to my knees and tried, but I couldn't. I was finally out of that hell. I didn't even care about the prize that was promised. I turned and saw that the door I went through was the entrance. I walked to my car and drove home, thinking of how nice a shower sounded. As I pulled up to my house, I felt uneasy. The joy of leaving No End House had faded, and dread was slowly building in my stomach. I shook it off as residual from the house and made my way to the front door. I entered and immediately went up to my room. There on my bed was my cat, Baskerville. He was the first living thing I had seen all night, and I reached to pet him. He hissed and swiped at my hand. I recoiled in shock, as he had never acted like that. I thought, whatever, he's an old cat. I jumped in the shower and got ready for what I was expecting to be a sleepless night. After my shower, I went to the kitchen and made something to eat. As I descended the stairs, I turned into the family room. What I saw would be forever burned into my mind, however. My parents were laying on the ground, naked and covered in blood. They were mutilated to near unidentifiable states. Their limbs were removed and placed next to their bodies. Their heads were placed on their chests facing me. The most unsettling parts were their expressions. They were smiling as though they were happy to see me. I vomited and sobbed there in my family room. I didn't know what had happened. They didn't even live with me at the time. I was a mess. Then I saw it. The door that was never there before. A door with a large 8 scrawled on it in blood. I was still in the house. I was standing in my family room, but I was in room 7. Faces of my parents smiled wider as I realized this. They weren't my parents. They couldn't be, but they looked exactly like them. The door marked 8 was across the room, behind the mutilated bodies in front of me. I knew I had to move on, but at that moment, I gave up. The smiling faces tore into my mind. They grounded me where I stood. I vomited again and nearly collapsed. And then the hum returned. It was louder than ever, and it filled the house and shook the walls. The hum compelled me to walk. I began to walk slowly, making my way closer to the door and the bodies. I could barely stand, let alone walk. Closer I got to my parents, the closer I came to suicide. The walls were now shaking so hard it seemed as though they were going to crumble. But their faces still smiled at me. As I inched closer, their eyes followed me. I was now between the 2 bodies, a few feet away from the door. The dismembered hands clawed their way across the carpet toward me. All the while, the faces continued to stare. New terror washed over me, and I walked faster. I didn't want to hear them speak. I didn't want the voices to match those of my parents. They began to open their mouths, and their hands were inches from my feet. In a dash of desperation, I lunged towards the door and threw it open and slammed it behind me. Room 8. I was done. After what I just experienced, I knew there wasn't anything else this fucking house could throw at me that I couldn't live through. There was nothing short of the fires of hell that I wasn't ready for. Unfortunately, I underestimated the abilities of the No End House. Unfortunately, things got more disturbing, more terrifying, and more unspeakable in Room 8. I still have trouble believing what I saw in Room 8. Again, the room was a carbon copy of rooms 3 and 6, but sitting in the usually empty chair was a man. After a few seconds of disbelief, my mind finally accepted the fact that the man sitting in the chair was me, not someone who looked like me. It was David Williams. I walked closer. I had to get a better look, even though I was sure of it. He looked up at me, and I noticed the tears in his eyes. Please, please don't do it. Please don't hurt me. What? I asked. Who are you? I'm not going to hurt you. Yes, you are. He was sobbing now. You're going to hurt me. I don't want you to. He sat in the chair with his legs up and began rocking back and forth. It was actually pretty pathetic looking, especially since he was me, identical in every way. Listen, who are you? I was now only a few feet from my doppelganger. It was the weirdest experience yet, standing there, talking to myself. I wasn't scared, but I would be soon. Why are you? You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. If you want to leave, you're going to hurt me. Why are you saying this? Just calm down, all right? Let's try to figure this out. Then I saw it. David sitting down was wearing the same clothes as me, except for a small red patch on his shirt, embroidered with the number 9. You're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. Please, please, no. You're going to hurt me. My eyes didn't leave the small number on his chest. I knew exactly what it was. The first few doors were plain and simple, but after a while, they got a little more ambiguous. 7 was scratched into the wall by my own hands. 8 was marked in blood above the bodies of my parents. But 9, this number was on a person, a living person. Worse still, it was a person that looked exactly like me. David? I had to ask. Yes, you're going to hurt me. You're going to hurt me. He continued to sob and rock. He answered to David. He was me, right down to the voice. But that 9, I paced around for a few minutes while he sobbed in his chair. The room had no door. Similarly to room 6, the door I came through was gone. For some reason, I assumed that scratching would get me nowhere this time. I studied the walls and the floor around the chair, sticking my head underneath and seeing if anything was below. Unfortunately, there was. Below the chair was a knife. Attached was a tag that read, "To David, from management." The feeling in my stomach as I read the tag was something sinister. I wanted to throw up, and the last thing I wanted to do was remove the knife from under the chair. The other David was still sobbing uncontrollably. My mind was spinning into an attic of unanswerable questions. Who put this here, and how did they get my name? Not to mention the fact that as I knelt on the cold floor, I was also sitting on the chair, sobbing in protest of being hurt by myself. It was all too much to process. The house and the management had been playing with me this whole time. My thoughts, for some reason, turned to Peter, and whether or not he got this far. If he did, if he met a Peter Terry sobbing in this very chair, rocking back and forth. I shook those thoughts out of my head. They didn't matter. I took the knife from under the chair, and immediately the other David went quiet. "David," he said in my voice, "what do you think you're going to do?" I lifted myself from the ground and clenched the knife in my hand. "I'm going to get out of here." David was still sitting in the chair, though he was very calm now. He looked up at me with a slight grin. I couldn't tell if he was going to laugh or strangle me. Slowly, he got up from the chair and stood facing me. It was uncanny. His height, and even the way he stood, matched mine. I felt the rubber hilt of the knife in my hand and gripped it tighter. I don't know what I was planning on doing with it, but I had a feeling I was going to need it. Now, his voice was slightly deeper than my own. "I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to hurt you, and I'm going to keep you here." I didn't respond. I just lunged and tackled him to the ground. I had mounted him and looked down, the knife poised and ready. He looked up at me, terrified. It was like I was looking in a mirror. Then the hum returned low and distant, though I still felt it deep in my body. David looked up at me as I looked down at myself, the hum getting louder, and I felt something inside me snap. With one motion, I slammed the knife down into the patch on his chest and ripped down. Blackness fell on the room, and I was falling. The darkness around me was like nothing I'd experienced up to that point. Room 4 was dark, but it couldn't come close to what was completely engulfing me. I wasn't even sure if I was falling after a while. I felt weightless, covered in dark. Then a deep sadness came over me. I felt lost, depressed, suicidal. The sight of my parents entered my mind, and I knew it wasn't real, but I had seen it. And the mind had trouble differentiating between what is real and what isn't. The sadness only deepened. I was in room 9 for what seemed like days. The final room, and that's exactly what it was. The end. No end house had an end, and I had reached it. At that moment, I gave up hope. In that moment, I knew I would be in that in-between state forever, accompanied by nothing but darkness. Not even the hum was there to keep me sane. I had lost all senses. I couldn't feel myself. I couldn't hear anything. Sight was completely useless here. I searched for a taste in my mouth and found nothing. I felt disembodied and completely lost. I knew where I was. This was hell. Room 9 was hell. Then it happened. A light. One of those stereotypical lights at the end of the tunnel. I felt the ground come up from below me, and I was standing. After a moment or two of gathering my thoughts and senses, I slowly walked toward the light. As I approached the light, it took form. It was a vertical slit down the side of an unmarked door. I slowly walked through the door and found myself back where I had started. The lobby of No End House. It was exactly how I left it. Still empty, still decorated with childish Halloween decorations. After everything that had happened that night, I was still wary of where I was. After a few moments of normalcy, I looked around the place trying to find anything different. On the desk was a plain white envelope with my name handwritten on it. Immensely curious, yet still cautious, I mustered up the courage to open the envelope. Inside was a letter, again, handwritten. David Williams, congratulations. You've made it to the end of No End House. Please accept this prize as a token of great achievement. Yours forever, Management. With the letter were 5 $100 bills. I couldn't stop laughing. I laughed for what seemed like hours. I laughed as I walked out to my car, and I laughed as I drove home. I laughed as I pulled into my driveway. I laughed as I opened my front door. And I laughed as I saw the small 10 etched into the wood.
My mom was always into witchcraft and satanic rituals. Of course, as a young child, I didn't know what the candles, the countless ritual books, and the demonic voices coming from her room meant. She always told me that she was just playing a game and not to come in there and bother her after midnight. She made that very clear. When I was around 8, my mom became different. She was violent and said horrifying things in her sleep, but her voice, God, that voice, it wasn't hers. My mom was very sweet and sensitive towards me. She woke me up every morning by sitting on my bed and stroking my hair, then whispering that breakfast was ready. She always made sure I had everything I needed. But one day, that all changed. She became abusive. She would call me a bitch or tell me that I was a failed abortion, that she never wanted me and she never will. She would spit in my food right in front of me, and when I would question her behavior or get upset, she would hit me or throw things at me. The mother I once loved dearly was gone and she wasn't coming back. A few months after she started acting strange, she vanished. My grandmother, who also lived in the house with us, was the one who found my mom's empty room. At first, we thought nothing of it. Maybe she went to the store or to someone's house. After 3 days passed, we filed a missing persons report, but the trail went cold. Needless to say, I was devastated. Losing your parents at all is hard enough, but more so at such a young age. My dad was never in my life. I was the result of a one-night stand and, for my dad, an affair. Once his wife found out that he had gotten another woman pregnant, they moved out of the state, and I never even got to meet him, much less talk to him. My grandmother became my new mom. I didn't mind this because we've always been extremely close. She ended up putting a lock on my mom's old room. She said it was for my own good. The lock didn't help though, because the door would always open on its own volition around midnight. One night, curiosity got the best of me, and I went into the room. It smelled awful, and everything was strewn about so carelessly, which was out of the ordinary for my OCD, germaphobe mother. I looked around the room to see if I could find anything that would lead to finding her. On her desk, I found books upon books about satanic rituals, how to perform them, and the materials needed. I moved on. Standing on the dresser were blood-red candles, used so much there was barely any wax left at all. Hung from the walls with old rusty nails were pages, some with drawings of creatures, some with writing in another language, which is strange considering my mother only knew English. I finally had the thought to look on the ground, maybe under the bed. After all, that's where I always hid stuff. I immediately regret that decision, for on the ground was a pentagram. It was drawn in what looked like blood, but I was too afraid to find out for sure. Startled, I backed up rather quickly, slamming the nightstand and knocking things down. This alerted and awoke my grandmother, who came in and shooed me out of the room. Then she scolded me for having disobeyed her. After what I saw in my mom's room, I decided to do some research. I went to the school library to see if I could find any books on the subject. Nothing. Probably because most, if not all, of the books in an elementary school library were G-rated. Eventually, I talked my grandmother into getting me a library card from the community library. I knew there had to be something there. Thus, I began my research. She would take me every weekend, but this only lasted about 3 weeks. She eventually caught on to what I was doing, and that was the end of that. After my 9th birthday, things took a turn for the worst. I began seeing entities in my room at night and hearing voices. At first, I tried to ignore it, but my young body couldn't handle so many sleepless nights, wide-eyed with terror. My grandmother began to notice something was wrong and took me to the doctor. I was diagnosed with childhood schizophrenia. They gave me a prescription for antipsychotics and sent me on my way. At first, I thought it helped, but maybe it was just the placebo effect, because the happiness didn't last long before the voices were back to torment me. On a particular dreary night, a very prominent voice came forward.
"You're trying to get rid of me, are you?"
Terrified, I didn't answer. I tried to lay as still as possible. Maybe it would think I was asleep and leave me alone. But it spoke again.
"You know that won't work. Your mother opened the door for me long ago, and without her here to close it, I have free rein. Now that she's been removed, I'd like to offer you something."
The way it said that she was removed sent shivers down my spine. I made a very faint whisper. "What?" The mysterious voice got deeper this time.
"I want you to be my friend."
It would have felt more appropriate if it had used the word victim instead of friend. I finally mustered up the courage to speak after what felt like hours. "What do you mean?" My voice sounded weak. The voice got louder, but not in the sense that it was screaming. More like it was much closer, within a couple feet from my face.
"I want you to be my new friend. Your mother's time had come to an end. Now, I have chosen you."
It took a few seconds to continue the sentence, but It finally broke the silence.
Your only option is to say yes.
I froze. My heart was racing. All I could get out was, oh, okay. It chuckled.
Now let's begin your initiation.
The old wood floor creaked beneath my feet when stepping inside the abandoned shack. A feeling of solitude enveloped me as the raindrops ceased to fall on my scalp. The rusted tin roof still held strong against the weather, as the floorboards remained covered in old dust. There were no windows in the place, however, just large rectangular gaps that made up the top halves of 3 out of the 4 walls. I could see the surrounding forest perfectly, and whatever called this wilderness home could see me just as well. The storm was sudden. In fact, I didn't recall whether the rain began to fall before or after I had entered the pathway leading to this derelict abode. The walk itself was a vague memory, for all I could think about on my way here was my unhappy wife, the woman I had brought to live with me in my childhood home. Our fights had gotten more and more frequent with recent years, but with our move to this place, our conflicts became almost daily. My visit was due to my desire for seclusion from said conflicts and from my failures as a husband. Viewing what remained of an old hog house disintegrated and void of purpose, save for harboring a broken man of equal description, I walked over to the back wall to sit down and caught the sight of the pond. The raindrops created ripples throughout the muck and the decaying leaves sank further down. I was taught to be cautious of it, that playing around the already ominous body of water was to walk ignorantly into grave danger. Whether by water moccasins or entrapment within the thick mud, the pond was to be feared. Though with the day, its dark nature seemed non-existent, for the sun had begun to shine in the distance along with the faint signs of a rainbow. Surprisingly, I felt warm after passing through a near quarter-mile of precipitation, and with the warmth, I took to the floor and slept. I awoke on into the night, to their cries, and faced their mangled bodies as they surrounded me. Outstretched limbs reached for me, and tear-filled eyes gazed upon me with widened expressions. I screamed at the sight, immediately bringing me out of my slumber. Their wails were deafening, and their numbers filled the entire shack. I felt their hands touch me. They were cold, dead. I fought them off of me as I rose to my feet. It was then when my senses took in the visage surrounding me. Out of the gap I could see the pond and the legion of spirits rising from the water. It was then that my darting eyes took in the details of these wretched beings. Hair of black, tattered leather clothing, many adorned with feathers. A spectral tribe of Native Americans. Their hands were held out to me. They revealed to me their wounds, manglings that had taken place at the moment of their murder. I was so frightened by this sight that I burst through the crowd with an unknown strength. I left the shack and made for the path. Their cries were behind me, but never did their voices lose their power. Within moments my house was in view. I ran without thinking. I had to get inside. Without looking back, I darted towards the back door, and found relief upon it being unlocked. However, upon entering, I noticed the lights suddenly had gone out. A male voice sounded a moment later. "Who's there?" he shouted. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A man had broken into our home. In the living room doorway, I saw him walk through with a flashlight. I rushed at him. I couldn't let him hurt my wife. I couldn't fail her. Not like this. But 2 gunshots rang out, stopping me in my tracks. I looked down at my chest and seen the blood. Suddenly, my wife's scream broke out, and I could see her standing behind the man, covered in a bedsheet, naked. The pistol fell to the floor, and I beheld the horror in the man's eyes. "It can't be," he said, backing away. I killed you." I looked back to the blood on my chest, and seeing that it wasn't coming from any bullet holes, but from my throat. A hand sat upon my shoulder, Then another pressed comfortingly on my back, and then another on my arm. They understood what had been taken from me.
This is a true story that happened to me and my girlfriend, at the time, now my wife, 5 years ago. I had just moved to Rockford, Illinois after graduating college to start my first engineering job. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a building in a small apartment complex. First couple of weeks, I spent a lot of time inside unpacking since I didn't know anyone in town yet. It was a brand new area for me. Everything seemed fine for those first couple of weeks. About 2.5 weeks after I moved in, I woke up at 4:30 one morning to head to the gym before work. It is pitch black in my apartment as Midwest fall nights are extremely dark after the moon sets. I turn out of the T-junction that leads to the 2 bedrooms and into the main hallway. I take a few steps and then notice what appears to be eyes with a bright spot in the center of each staring at me. I quickly lunged for the nearest light switch and turned it on, wondering what I saw. Being mostly a rational person, I looked for a way to explain what I saw. I noticed some lights coming through my patio door blinds from a flood lamp on the building behind me. At the time, I chalked this up to an illusion of this light since I was new to the place and unfamiliar with its idiosyncrasies. For about 3 weeks after that, all was quiet, except I had a slight uneasiness going to sleep at night. Cut to about a month later, the beginning of December, and my girlfriend has recently told me she can sometimes sense spirits, but had not sensed anything at my apartment in the night she had stayed over. We are sitting and watching TV when she notices some kind of spirit kneeling on the floor in the second, unused, except for storage, bedroom. We walk in and notice the room is colder than the surrounding hallway. We firmly tell it to go away and that it is not welcome. My girlfriend says it has gone. A few nights later, I am alone in the house sleeping. I wake up feeling a sense of dread in the middle of the night and open my eyes to see a 3-clawed hand directly above my face. Needless to say, I stayed awake the rest of the night with every light in the place on and the TV going. The rest of December is quiet as I spent the last 2 weeks of the month at my parents' house for the holidays. During the second week of January, my girlfriend decides to spend the weekend at my place. Things are getting serious between us at this point. Like I said, she is now my wife, and I believe this closeness we shared was making this thing mad. That night, she woke me and said it felt like something had scratched her on her lower leg. Upon inspection, 3 track marks of what looked like nail or cat scratches were bright red and visible on her leg. Again, we prayed hard, told whatever was there to go away, and slept with the lights on. About this time, we started to notice that her son, 4 years old at the time, was terrified to come over to my apartment. He wouldn't say why, just that he didn't like it and that he wanted to do something fun with me, just not at my house. Girlfriend and I shrugged it off as some weird kid thing for the time being, not quite connecting the dots. Not long after the scratching incident, maybe 5 days, I went to bed feeling uneasy and was awoke shortly after falling asleep by something kicking the underside of my bed, hard, 3 times. The air in the room was downright chilly, and I rolled over and started to pray for protection, not opening my eyes. In a moment, I heard what sounded like a wrestling match in my room. I opened my eyes but could not distinguish anything in the dark. I heard something crash into the closet door, then bump one of my nightstands and the foot of my bed hard enough to move me a bit. All of a sudden, it all went quiet, and the room felt calmer and was physically warmer. I had hoped this was the end of this ordeal, which by now had me quite afraid. About a week later, it was my girlfriend's weekend without her boy. His dad had him, and she wanted to stay over again. She lived in her mom's house and preferred my place. Everything is great during the day and evening. We fall asleep, and I wake up to the sense of motion in the bed. I look over and see my girlfriend's leg outstretched and in the air as if something is pulling on it. Then her body was being pulled by her leg very similarly to that scene in Paranormal Activity, where the girl is being dragged out of her bed in the same manner. I reacted quickly and jumped on top of her to hold her back and on the bed. I could feel her body being pulled against mine as she woke up screaming, saying something had her leg. I was a strong guy at the time, deadlifting over 500 pounds, and had to use every ounce of strength I had to hold her back onto the bed and fight against the pull of this thing. We waited out the rest of the night in each other's arms, awake and with all the lights on again. After that, she swore not to spend the night there anymore, and we were both more terrified than ever before or since. This thing grew bolder with her out of the picture and started harassing me all over the apartment. I would come home and find stuff out of place or a cabinet open that had been left closed. It made its presence known the entire time I was in the apartment from then on. I put up crosses and left open Bibles out turned to passages of protection from evil. These seemed to offer a small zone of protection, but I was seeing the need to move out soon. I've never felt a fear like that before or since. After speaking with my pastor and mentor, they both advised me to leave as quietly as I could and not put out anything in the apartment that would give a clue as to where I was going. My girlfriend let me stay with her while I secured a new place. The last time either of us set foot in the apartment at night, we had to retrieve something I needed for work from, of course, the master bedroom. My girlfriend grabbed it out of the room and started backing out, slowly turning out the lights as she went. When she reached the light switch at the door, she backed out, then slid her hand in the front door to flick off the last light. As soon as she did, she heard the thing running towards the door, just as she locked it. It vibrated violently as something slammed against it. I moved all of my stuff out a couple of weeks later in the daylight, and still get a creepy feeling of remembering when I drive past when in town visiting my in-laws. Whatever it was did not follow, and I have not had any issues since.
My family has never been a happy family. My dad often walked out on us for up to a year at a time and left us helpless. My sisters and I were used to it, but it always struck my mom as a surprise every time he left. It would leave her feeling alone and helpless. She felt like she needed a man there to protect a household full of girls. The last time my dad left was probably 3 years ago. Around a month after he left, I was sitting on my bed doing homework when I looked towards the doorway of my room and saw someone walk by. I thought it was only in my head, so I simply brushed it off. A few days later, I was doing the same thing and sitting in the same place when I looked and saw the silhouette of a man standing there. He was tall, took up most of the frame, and lean. Before I could really focus on him, he walked in the same direction he walked last time. I got up to see where he had gone, but there was no one there. I kept the sightings of this shadow man to myself. I didn't want my mom thinking I was seeing a man walking throughout the house. This went on for weeks, until my sister confessed she had seen the man as well. She told me that she was laying on the couch in the living room, waiting for me so she could take me to school, when she heard me come out of the bathroom. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw me walk down the hallway and into the kitchen, then duck as if I was picking something up. That's when I came out of my room and told her I was ready. She told me what she had seen, and I told her about what I had seen. We decided not to tell our mom or sister about this, since it would surely scare them. A few days after that incident, I was fast asleep when I felt my blanket being pulled off me. I thought it was simply too far down my mattress and was probably falling by itself, until I tried to bring it back up. As I pulled on it to cover myself, I felt a resistance. I pulled harder and harder until it finally budged. That's when I heard my mom scream. My sisters and I ran towards her bedroom to find her sitting up in the bed praying endlessly. After we calmed her down, she told us a man had been standing over her bed watching her sleep, but when she sat up, he was gone. The next day, my uncle called my mom, which was rare because this uncle never called unless he needed something. But he didn't need anything this time. He called my mom to tell her that he had had a dream with all of us, my mom and my sisters, in it. He said that we were covered by a dark shadow and a man had been walking around us the way a predator circles his prey before pouncing on them. Later that day, my mom arranged for a priest to come by to cleanse our house. Right as the priest came into the door, he said the air felt heavy. He went on to sprinkle holy water in every room and said a few prayers with us. A week later, my dad showed up and decided he wanted to be a father again. He stayed and nothing else appeared. My mom believed that the man had not come back because my dad was there, but little did she know that only a few days ago, I heard a little girl laugh right outside the bathroom door in the early hours of the morning when no one else was awake.
Growing up, I always wanted to be a mermaid. I think a lot of children have that same wish. I believed firmly that mermaid was an occupation that I could be once I was old enough. I imagined of eventually growing a long, chubby tail with glittering scales. I had dreams of gliding effortlessly through the water. Maybe I would grow tendrils of beautiful red hair that fell all the way down to the ground. I looked forward for the day when I would be a real-life official mermaid. My family lived right on the rocks by the ocean. It was a beautiful setting to grow up in. I know now people would kill for a home on the water. The sea breeze would whip by my face each day. It always smelled like fresh rain. I spent most of my time on the beach collecting shells or building fairy huts in the sand. Dolphins were everywhere, chattering to each other. There were beautifully colored fish and other adorable sea creatures. It was paradise. I had 4 sisters who I spent all my time with. Each was older than me and much more mature. Even so, they entertained my mermaid fantasy by helping me build elaborate seaweed tales. One would pretend to be a drowning prince, and I would rescue them. We'd all cheer as I saved the long-lost prince. I loved to be held in their arms, laughing as they swum me around the tide. But of course you can't just decide to be a mermaid. My mother made that abundantly clear. Every time I would bring it up, she would scoff at me. Mermaids aren't real, she'd say firmly. She even scolded my sisters for playing at it with me. You shouldn't encourage her. My mother was probably right. You can't just be something you're not. I learned that on the eve of my 12th birthday. It was night, and my sisters and I were sitting on the rocks. We basked in the glow of the moonlight. A ship approached. It was just a small fishing ship, most likely lost. I usually stayed quiet and watched as my sisters prepared dinner. But that night, my mother nodded at me. It was my time. I cleared my throat. My breath tasted of rotted fish and salt. I opened my mouth and began singing. My voice echoed across the beach. To my ears, it sounded like the call of a dying animal. It pitched and fell awkwardly. My sisters were smiling. The terrible tone of my singing drove the animals from the shore. To the captain, though, my song sounded beautiful. He looked out across the water to see me, a young girl, resting upon a boulder. In his eyes, I was radiant. Perhaps I had long red hair like the mermaid I wanted to be as a child. To him, my body was supple and young. My legs were spread innocently, beckoningly. He could not resist the combination of my beauty and my song. In reality, I wore the skin of a dead girl. My pointed teeth careened against the reptilian shape of my head. Like my mother, I had 3 armored tails that crashed against the water. My hands curled like claws. My second mouth was open and chomping where my stomach might have been. Putrid fins darted along my torso. Of my sisters, I was the most hideous. If they had loved me less, they may have been jealous. But like all the men before him, the captain could only see what we wanted him to. He rowed his ship as long as he could before the need overtook him. He dove into the water. He swam against the current, eager to reach his vision of the naked girl. I kept singing. Soon, my sisters joined me, our horrible cries making ripples on the ocean's surface. The man never made it to us. He drowned almost 20 feet away. It was so comforting to see the milk-white corpse bobbing in the moonlight. My mother smiled at me with her second mouth. "You did well, daughter. Now go fetch the body for supper." Sometimes I miss those childhood dreams of being a mermaid. But truthfully, I wouldn't change who I am now. It is much more fun to watch men die than it is to save them.
My grandpa worked as the gardener in the biggest cemetery in my state for about 16 years. On my grandpa's first day, he noticed that there was one section of the graveyard where the grass was significantly wilder and uglier than the rest. He asked some more seasoned workers who told him that most gardeners were too afraid of that part to work there, saying that freaky shit always happened there. But my grandfather was a hardened 60-plus-year-old European man who survived conscription in a communist army toward the ass end of World War II. So, he promptly thought to himself, "Fuck these pansies," and pushed a lawnmower the fuck over there. It's important to note that he didn't turn the lawnmower on and that he was pushing it over the grass, far away from the concrete paths and keeping his distance from the graves themselves. He got to the edge of the so-called spooky area. Leaning down to start the lawnmower, he noticed something shiny in the grass, dangerously close to the lawnmower itself. He reached out to see what it was, just in case it could get caught in the blades and damage the machine. He was about to pick it up when the lawnmower started on its own. He yanked his hand away and stood up, backing away from it. Behind him, a huge cement headstone cracked in the middle. So he thought, "Fuck this," turned off the lawnmower and hightailed the fuck out of there. And for the next 16 years, he never went back to that part of the graveyard ever again.
So I do a lot of thrift shopping. Goodwill, Salvation Army, mom and pop shops, auctions, etc. I do it for fun and to make a few dollars if I can find the right item. I never had luck when buying artwork, but for some reason, I still do it. About 2 years ago, I found an old sketch painting of a small street in a town. The brushwork was impressive. The tips of the houses in the street all had a wispy edge to them. The background was brownish tan that looked like it was in the sun for too long. The houses and everything else had a warm crimson color. The signature was hidden by the frame. It was under $10, so I figured I'd test my luck. I brought it home that day and stuck it in my closet and forgot all about it. About a year later, the night terrors started. I've never had them before and I never want to have them again. I would fall asleep around 2 to 4 a.m. and I would, quote-unquote, wake up with my eyes focused on the closet. They were drawn to it. The darkness of my closet would slowly form into a shape of a very tall man. The form would drift over to my bed and just sit there, staring at me. It did have eyes, and it was all black, but I could just feel it. I was never able to move in this situation, just sit and tremble in fear. It would move closer and closer, and sometimes putting its face just inches from mine. Other times it would throw its hands into my chest. I would eventually wake up screaming, absolutely terrified. I'd grab my fiancée tight, call my dogs into the bed, and try to fall back asleep. It was an every night thing. I eventually looked up some stuff online about night terrors and sleep paralysis. It was all similar, but nothing quite right. She was in the middle of her finals to become an RN. Last thing I wanted to do was freak her out about some nightmares. I told my fiancée that I had been having trouble sleeping recently. I didn't go into detail with her about why. She said, and I quote, "Yeah, it was weird last night. I woke up and felt like something was there with us." She casually shrugged it off, distress. Meanwhile, I'm covered in goosebumps. I went through my house with some sage and tried cleansing it, but nothing changed. I was nervous to be in my room alone. I was nervous to be in my house alone. I was just scared. All the time. One night, I went to sleep and then I woke up, but I wasn't in my bed, but on a street. It felt familiar but uncomfortable. As I turned my head to the right, I saw a house on fire. Their long smoke trails left the house's memories in the sky. I eventually hit one house and froze. The figure was at the door of the house. It saw me. In an instant, it was in front of me, his arms wrapped around me, and everything went black. I woke up pouring sweat. This was a pure level of fear that I had never experienced before. At first, it didn't click with me. I was still going to bed in fear. The shadow figure was getting more and more intense in each dream. He wasn't just in the closet anymore. Sometimes he would start in the corner of my room and come to the foot of my bed. Before waking me up, he would taunt me, moving about, to my fiance's side of the bed with his hands just above her face. A week or so after my dream in the town, my fiancée was going through our closet and asked why I kept storing shit in there. She asked me to please clean it up. I went up there and started going through my piles and found the sketch painting of the small road in a small town. That's where I was in my dream. There wasn't a doubt about it. I brought it outside and put it at the curb for bulk pickup. Ever since then, the night terrors stopped.
In 2003, a photograph depicting a lost child began circulating on the internet. There was no detail on the child, other than what was seen in the actual photo, and could be found under the search parameters Find Me. The photo showed a smiling young girl, about 8 or 9 years old. The girl is seen standing alone in front of a swing set, wearing a purple dress with a white flower in her hair. Her name or where she was seen last was never mentioned. Circulating the internet through emails and pop-ups, the girl was seen by millions, but never found. 1 year to the day after the photo initially began its circulation, the image returned to the internet. Text on the photo stated "Find Me," but now the photo had changed. The swing set was battered, the paint rusting and chipping away, and the swing hanging by a single chain. The girl appeared older, and her smile had faded into a look of indifference, and the white flower in her hair began to wilt. The image reappeared the following year, to the date, with further alterations. The swing broken in half, the chain and seat on the ground. The girl was again older, now crying, her flower now dead, and her dress dirty and torn. "Find Me" was written in red text across the bottom of the photo. The third year, the photo returned. The swing set was gone, and a strange man was standing in the distance watching her. The girl was older, her sadness turned to anger, and her dress was now tattered rags. "Find Me" was written in large text on the photo. The fourth year showed the same girl, now a teenager, the strange man standing directly behind her, a camera in her hand. The girl had been beaten severely, her face bloodied and battered. She is now glaring with hollow eyes, her dress nothing more than bits of torn fabric. The text below then read, "Please find me." The fifth year, the photo returned, but now the girl was dead. Her body posed upright with a white flower tucked in her hands. The text on the photo read, "Why didn't you find me?" The 6th year, the photo circulated again. There was no one in the photo. It showed only the strange field where the broken swing set had once sat. The text below read simply, "I found you." Shortly thereafter, strange deaths began occurring. Each death revolved around a theme. The victims were always men, and each man had opened the file featuring the photo. The men were all found in the field with a white flower tucked in their hands. "I found you" was written across their face in their own blood after they had been beaten to death.
My family has never been a happy family. My dad often walked out on us for up to a year at a time and left us helpless. My sisters and I were used to it, but it always struck my mom as a surprise every time he left. It would leave her feeling alone and helpless. She felt like she needed a man there to protect a household full of girls. The last time my dad left was probably 3 years ago. Around a month after he left, I was sitting on my bed doing homework when I looked towards the doorway of my room and saw someone walk by. I thought it was only in my head, so I simply brushed it off. A few days later, I was doing the same thing and sitting in the same place when I looked and saw the silhouette of a man standing there. He was tall, took up most of the frame, and lean. Before I could really focus on him, he walked in the same direction he walked last time. I got up to see where he had gone, but there was no one there. I kept the sightings of this shadow man to myself. I didn't want my mom thinking I was seeing a man walking throughout the house. This went on for weeks, until my sister confessed she had seen the man as well. She told me that she was laying on the couch in the living room, waiting for me so she could take me to school, when she heard me come out of the bathroom. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw me walk down the hallway and into the kitchen, then duck as if I was picking something up. That's when I came out of my room and told her I was ready. She told me what she had seen, and I told her about what I had seen. We decided not to tell our mom or sister about this, since it would surely scare them. A few days after that incident, I was fast asleep when I felt my blanket being pulled off me. I thought it was simply too far down my mattress and was probably falling by itself, until I tried to bring it back up. As I pulled on it to cover myself, I felt a resistance. I pulled harder and harder until it finally budged. That's when I heard my mom scream. My sisters and I ran towards her bedroom to find her sitting up in the bed praying endlessly. After we calmed her down, she told us a man had been standing over her bed watching her sleep, but when she sat up, he was gone. The next day, my uncle called my mom, which was rare because this uncle never called unless he needed something. But he didn't need anything this time. He called my mom to tell her that he had had a dream with all of us, my mom and my sisters, in it. He said that we were covered by a dark shadow and a man had been walking around us the way a predator circles his prey before pouncing on them. Later that day, my mom arranged for a priest to come by to cleanse our house. Right as the priest came into the door, he said the air felt heavy. He went on to sprinkle holy water in every room and said a few prayers with us. A week later, my dad showed up and decided he wanted to be a father again. He stayed and nothing else appeared. My mom believed that the man had not come back because my dad was there, but little did she know that only a few days ago, I heard a little girl laugh right outside the bathroom door in the early hours of the morning, when no one else was awake.
So this was about 13 years ago, when I was about 6 or 7. There's really no date. I don't think it matters much, though. All I know is that this story was from before my parents got a divorce. Let me explain the layout of the rooms in the story. My room is at the top left corner and my bed is against the right wall. The room is connected to the hallway by the door near the end of the bed. Right across from my room is the kitchen, and in the kitchen my dad was making some popcorn before he and my mom popped in some movies. If this adds any depth or theories to the story, this house is actually where the firefighters used to live. It was directly across the street from the fire department. Nothing was really off about that night. We hadn't even watched any horror movies, he had told me. He threw in the homestyle popcorn my mom really loved and was sitting there. I heard something from your room. I think it was just a noise from the attic, he says. My dad went to check it out and he says he saw something that totally freaked him out. I wasn't on drugs, I swear. I had been clean for a few years. What he saw at the end of my bed was a little girl in a black gown sitting in a playful position, staring at me with her arms crossed. She turned around, looked at him, and then went back to staring at me. Holy shit, Ryan, I ran over and got your mom. We both went back, but she was gone. We brought you in the living room and you fell asleep with us later that night. I didn't sleep that much though. So this is what most people think is the end of the story, though it continues into the next few days. It rained pretty hard that day, exceptionally hard. Though it wasn't anything strange, we were living in a coastal town, so sometimes the ocean threw a nasty little storm at you. Well, that night, they didn't let me sleep in there again. Everyone went to sleep relatively early. When we woke up, there was an odd smell. My dad got up and walked to the bathroom, figuring he didn't flush. On the way there, he looked in my room. The ceiling had collapsed in on my bed. My dad is a carpenter. He said if I'd have been sleeping in there that night, it would have killed me.
In my hometown of Park City, Utah, things are usually pretty quiet and easygoing, due to it being the so-called #1 ski town on Earth by about 15 different ski magazines. Not much happens other than the Sundance Film Festival and the ski season. I'm telling you this to give you some kind of background and to let you realize that nothing paranormal or odd ever happens here or to any of its people. A few months ago, I started sleeping more. This could be because I'm a teenager and I'm probably still growing. When I say sleeping more, I mean a lot more. My daily routine is usually school, eating, and then sleeping until the next morning, which I would later come to find out is very unhealthy. This whole sleep thing seems irrelevant, but I will get into it shortly. A dream is defined as a series of thoughts, images, and sensations occurring in a person's mind during sleep. The dreams I started having were more defined as an event or an occurrence. What I mean by this is that they started to seem very real, and I started to believe that they were real. Some days I would think back to something believing that it was real, and not even realize that it was a dream. Then the dreams got violent. Some nights I would wake up from screams or loud noises echoing through my mind and seemingly in my house. I would always assume that they were just nightmares and go to sleep, but they just kept coming back. I started losing sleep and doing whatever I could to get out of having to go to bed. It got to the point I would even take on extra assignments at school so I could be doing something that would keep my mind awake. One particular afternoon, I was sitting at my dining room table doing some physics homework when I heard a knock on the door. I got up and walked over to the door to see who was there, as normal humans do, and no one was at the door. I shut the door assuming that it was just a grade schooler playing a trick. Then I turned from the door to walk back to the table, and I saw my mom, standing in the living room, just looking at me, with a puzzled face. Was someone there? She asked. No, it was just a doorbell ditcher, I replied. Well, don't doorbell ditchers usually ring the doorbell or knock? Yeah, they did knock. As soon as I finished my sentence, I heard my alarm clock go off, and I woke up in my bed. I was very confused because I was positive that the conversation I had with my mom was real. As I sat up in the bed, I realized that I was dreaming. I couldn't feel any part of my body. Everything felt cold and lifeless, as it usually does in a dream. My body laid back down in the bed. I fell asleep. Once more, and once more I heard my alarm clock go off, and I woke up in bed, still dreaming. I can't seem to get out of this loop. I've tried everything. There's only one way I can think of to end this torment.
I watched the smoke trail from my imitation of a cigarette sway to and fro like the hips of a dancing woman. Within the bar, the sounds of the regulars maintained their octave that I had been listening to for the last 50 or so years. I keep my eyes to the glass of bourbon in front of me, not feeling the need to pan the crowd for any newcomers. But of course, when you least expect them, that's when they sit on the stool next to you. Buy a girl a drink? Her voice brought out my worst trait, the one that placed me in this internal void of unfulfilled wants and unforgettable regrets. I turned to the new girl and flashed a grin her way. With what, baby? My good standing with Joe here? I focused hard and flicked my glass with my finger. The sound brought the faithful bartender to my aid, and within moments my guest had a drink before her. There you go, Tommy, Joe said, looking down. He was off again to tend to the regulars. Wow, seems like you've made a friend during your time here. Must not think it too foolish to serve the likes of you. She held her fingers in a C shape around her glass for a second, and then took hold of it, raised it to her lips, and took a delicate sip. Likes of me, huh? Well, he knows the score, knows that I bring in tourists sometimes. She placed the glass down again, then peered at me with the usual stare given by her kind. Let's get out of here. This place stinks. In a rush, are we? You're an anxious one. I'm not in the mood for romance. Not that you would know what that means. I know what romance means, but I am by no means a professional at the occupation. This one was sly. She knew my methods well. Perhaps tonight was the night. It was an evening much like this before, but I still had my methods. Hear that? That's my favorite song. I don't care. Don't you want to relax for a minute? Listen to the melody. I just want you. If you want me, then I'll go with you. But may I at least have a dance? You're strange. You're beautiful. She began to laugh. I felt a little more at ease. What are you wanting, Thomas? A second chance. Just like everyone else here. There's no second chances for you. It doesn't hurt to try. You would too if you were in my shoes. I was in your shoes once. How do you think I got to where I am now? In a bar with a washed-up soul. You deceived many. I know my ways around your ways. Then you can follow my lead. I stood up and held out my hand. She glanced downward to her lap. Been asked to dance recently? Never. How did I guess? She took one more sip from her drink, then joined me at the center floor. In the midst of dying matches and refilling glasses, we swayed to the rhythm of regret. Yet in this moment we shared in its reprieve. We stayed like this for the night's entirety, till the last of the patrons had left to return to their troubles. Likewise, I took her hand, and the two of us walked out to the street. Thank you for showing a girl a good time, she said. I suppose you would rather stay than come home with me. She stroked a strand of hair from her face, then peered up to me. I'll go wherever you want me to, baby. The night is ours. The night is yours. I give it back to you, she responded. She turned away from me and walked down the silent street. She turned back once as if to let me know what I was missing, but she continued on her way home without me. Likewise, I returned back to my stool where 2 full glasses of bourbon sat untouched. Joe stepped over to them and asked if I was done. I gave no sign, and he took the drinks and poured them out. 2 wasted glasses of bourbon, 1 wasted life. Joe flipped off the lights, leaving me in silence, till the regulars returned again. I thought of the girl and what could have been. Tonight wasn't the night, but one night it will be. As it was when I deceived the wrong woman, leading to my death. I now sat as a lonely, regretful spirit that haunts a place where those still living attempt to drown their own regrets. It beats the alternative which guys like me deserve, and one evening I will face. But as of tonight, I still got my touch.